It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. Mr. Rajwani is currently the Chief Anti-Money Laundering Officer for the RBC Financial Group, responsible for leading RBC's global AML program, which encompasses anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, economic sanctions, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, and client risk management initiatives. Drawing on more than 20 years of risk management, compliance, and financial accounting experience, Mr. Rajwani is a leading authority on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist finances both domestically and internationally, and speaks frequently on these matters in banking, legal, compliance, and academic platforms. He told me he spoke earlier this month in Halifax to law enforcement for 2.5 hours. I understand he did a presentation and does another one this afternoon. So we are very honored that he could take the time to meet with us. Mr. Rajwani is appointed a member of the Advisory Council on National Security to the Office of the Prime Minister of Canada on issues of national security, and is also co-chair to the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists, ACAMS Canada Chapter. And I guess since he reports to the Prime Minister of Canada, he's very happy that the Prime Minister still has his job. Mr. Rajwani has overseen the development and implementation of RBC's AML CTF program from its inception. As the Chief Anti-Money Laundering Officer of Canada's largest bank, he has led RBC's development and implementation of numerous AML solutions, covering offices in 53 countries and clients across retail banking, wealth management, insurance, and corporate investment banking platforms. Prior to taking on his role at RBC, he held various management positions focused on risk management, internal controls, operational risk, and IT development. In addition to his risk management experience, he has worked for various financial institutions, chartered accountant, management consultant firms, overseeing the implementation of enterprise-wide risk management and compliance initiatives. He has a double honor degree in accounting and finance and is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Canada, England, and Wales. I'd just like to point out to you he got this position 2 days before 9/11. Mr. Rajwani.
Thank you. Thank you for those very generous comments. Yes, I took on my position 2 days before 9/11, and what I thought I was taking on and what I took on are two completely different things. First, I would like to begin by thanking the Empire Club for this opportunity to address such distinguished guests. It is truly an honor to be invited to present by such a prestigious organization. Today, I would like to speak to you on the subject of money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada. I hope to share with you some insights into the current challenges facing Canadian society in combating money laundering and terrorist financing, and the role financial institutions have come to play in this regard. The nature of money laundering and terrorism financing has continued to evolve over the past decade, both domestically and internationally, and Canadian financial institutions have had to adapt accordingly. Before I delve further into the subject, let me share some background on money laundering and terrorist financing. While there are a number of anti-money laundering professionals in the audience, I think it's important to set a level playing field. Put simply, money laundering is the process by which the proceeds of crime are disguised and given the appearance of being legitimately derived funds. By concealing the money's illicit origins, the criminal is then free to use the funds both to support their lifestyle and to fund further criminal activity. Ironically, the biggest problem many criminals have is that they simply have too much cash. While this may seem strange to the most of us, having millions, in fact tens of millions of dollars, does have its problems. Namely, you need a place to store it. You also generally need to get it into the financial system if you want to move it around without transporting large volumes of physical cash. As a criminal, you also generally want to avoid getting noticed, and spending this much cash can attract some undesired attention, particularly if you don't have a good explanation for where it came from. It is important to remember that crime is a business. Career criminals at least the successful ones are profit-oriented, financially savvy individuals that want to invest their cash and have access to it, well, let's call them business opportunities as they arise. In order to continue to operate, they need to make the source of funds appear to be legitimate. And that's where the often complex process of laundering the funds comes into play. And at some point along the way, as a gateway to the international financial system, a bank product or service of some sort is generally abused by the money launderer. Like any other business, organized crime needs banking facilities. They need to deposit their earnings, they pay their employees and their suppliers just like everyone else. The key difference is these organizations profit from death, misery, victimization, and suffering of others. To keep the cycle going and stay in business, it is critical that the criminals have sophisticated processes and operations to continually launder their funds. So how do criminals launder their money? There are as many ways to launder money as the imagination allows, and the schemes being used are becoming increasingly sophisticated and complicated as technology advances. However, there are three key stages that money launderers typically follow to transform dirty money into clean money. The first challenge is getting the illegal profits into the financial system. This is often referred to as placement. This might be done by breaking up large amounts of cash into less conspicuous, smaller amounts that are then deposited directly into a bank account over a period of time, or even into a number of different bank accounts at different institutions to avoid raising suspicion. Sometimes proceeds of crime enter the financial system through the purchase of a series of monetary instruments such as checks and money orders. Purchased from one financial institution, collected and deposited into another institution. While people tend to ask a lot of questions about cash, generally checks and money orders issued by a reputable bank give the funds the appearance of legitimacy, and that may not raise as many questions. It's also easier to make monetary instruments look like business receipts, which enhances the appearance of legitimacy and which makes it easier to continue to launder the funds, as well as making it more difficult to identify. Once the funds have successfully entered the financial system, the next challenge is to layer the funds. In this phase, the money launderer engages in a series of conversions of movement of funds to distance them from their source and obscure the trail. The funds may revolve through the purchase and sale of investment instruments, or the launderer might simply wire the funds through a series of bank accounts across the globe. In some instances, the launderer might disguise the transfers as payments for goods and services. If the criminal can successfully process the legitimate profits through the first two phases and feels the criminal origins of the funds are suitably obscured, he or she can then move on to the third stage and reap the rewards of their criminal activities. The integration stage is accomplished when the funds re-enter the legitimate economy, which may take in the form of real estate investments, purchase of luxury assets, or even business ventures. Terrorist financing has a slightly different challenge from money laundering, although similar processes are employed. At its most basic, terrorist financing is the act of financing a terrorist activity. Just as criminals require financing to conduct their illicit activities, terrorists also need access to funds to carry out their work. In this respect, the financial system is equally vulnerable to abuse by terrorists as it is to criminals. To be successful and sustain ongoing activities, a terrorist organization must not only obtain funding, but must obscure the links between those funds and the activities they support. And it must ensure that the funds are available to whoever requires them as needed to prepare for and to commit acts of terrorism. Increasingly, we are seeing a convergence of criminal activity and terrorism financing. Fraud for profit and fraud for motive are virtually indistinguishable. Terrorist groups often rely on revenue-generating enterprises to finance their activities, which may involve both legal and criminal activities. They are increasingly using smuggling, fraud, and narcotics trafficking in order to generate funds, which then must be laundered back through the financial system before they can be used, obviously in such a way as to avoid drawing the attention of the authorities. While some terrorist organizations have historically used criminal activities to fund their causes, to others this is a relatively new concept. Prior to 9/11, terrorist funding organizations such as Al-Qaeda depended in a large part upon sizable donations, often using charities from states and wealthy individuals that sympathized with the cause. As international measures to track the flow of funds have improved and international pressure and attention has increased, organizations such as Al-Qaeda have sought other forms of financing. Furthermore, as the leadership of Al-Qaeda has been slowly dismantled, it has transformed itself from an organization to an ideology. As a result, smaller groups that are loosely tied to or affiliated with Al-Qaeda have formed across the world. This is often referred to as homegrown cells, where individuals are radicalized often via the internet and religious centers. Such groups need funding, not a lot, but they still need funding. Increasingly, such funding comes from criminal activity, such as credit card and other frauds, as well as narcotics trafficking. From a financial institution's perspective, all such activity can look the same as typical banking activity. For example, the cost of 9/11 is thought to be under $500,000. The Madrid bombings, $200,000. And the 7/7 London bombings, only about $1,000. But is this a problem for Canada? Unfortunately, it is a major problem. In Canada, money laundering is a multi-billion-dollar problem. It is a fundamental underpinning of organized criminal activity that facilitates the flow of drugs into our schools, incites violence in our cities, and negatively impacts our country's economic growth. Every minute of every day, the proceeds of drug trafficking, contraband goods, trafficking in humans, extortion, fraud, and many other crimes are transformed into apparently legitimately earned funds to support drug dealers, terrorist organizations, and other criminals in their efforts to amass wealth, expand their criminal empires, and perpetrate acts of terror. It is a very sobering reality. Canada has long been recognized as a country that, on average, offers a high standard of living and a good quality of life. And increasingly, criminals are choosing our country as an attractive place to live and work. Some of the reasons behind this could be our unique geographic characteristics, the hundreds of kilometers of ports and open shoreline on either coast, and the immensely large, unprotected border with our neighbor to the south. This makes us a very attractive transshipment point for a number of illicit products and services. Our proximity to one of the largest economies in the world, which also happens to be one of the largest drug consumers in the world, is a major contributing factor. Other concerns raised are that in Canada, financial crime is considered not to have victims. And historically, we have had lower sentences, and some would argue lower prosecution rates. Unfortunately, due to some of these reasons, Canada has become a destination of choice. Canada continues to face a growing problem with organized criminal activity. I'd like to share a few examples of the top profit-generating crimes in Canada today and some alarming trends. Canada is now considered a criminal microcosm of global organized crime. Most major criminal organizations in the world are active in Canada, and a large part of that is due to our role in the lucrative global drug trade as importers, manufacturers, transshipment point, and exporter. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime publishes the World Drug Report every 2 years, tracking trends in proliferation, manufacture, export, use, and abuse of illicit drugs around the world. In 2007, the UN found that Canada led the industrialized world in marijuana use, at least when calculated as a percentage of the population. In 2009, Canada was identified as the leading supplier of ecstasy in North America, as well as a major producer and shipper of meth for markets around the world. Canadian trade based in meth has grown so much so since 2003 that by 2007, 83% of all meth seized in Australia came from Canada. In Japan, the figure was 62%. The two major ways to get drugs into the United States are one, across the Mexican border, which you know is receiving a lot of attention, and the second is via Canada. Direct shipments into the United States is becoming increasingly difficult as U.S. authorities continue to enhance monitoring of shipments and ports. And Canada is considered a less risky alternative. The nature of organized crime is that large cartels want to have their own folks on the ground whom they can trust. It is not something they can or want to outsource. Given this, most organized groups, including the largest cartels, have a presence in Canada and have done so for as long as Canada has been a country. Think about this fact. Some global cartels earn tens of billions of dollars a year. The Fraser Institute estimates that Canada's GDP is estimated to be 2 to 3% lower than what it should be due to the underground economy. We have the full range of organized criminal gangs, from importers to distributors and resellers of drugs, as well as groups focused on trafficking and other crimes. Increasingly, large cartels are seeing the benefits of working together rather than fighting for turf, as there is plenty of money for all. And with millions, in fact billions of dollars comes corruption, highly sophisticated organizations, as well as armed gangs. If left unchecked, we end up what Mexico is dealing with. There continues to be a growing influence of gangs in Canadian narcotic industry, including the outlaw motorcycle gangs in central Canada and gangs on the west coast linked to major international crime syndicates, such as the Chinese triads, which have become a major force in U.S.-Canadian criminal traffic. Ecstasy, marijuana, and people are smuggled south across the border, and cocaine and guns are smuggled north, with cash going both ways as profit and payment. In 2008, The Economist estimated that historically low Canada had 950 major gangs, with Vancouver as ground zero. This decade, the BC drug trade has spiked to a now estimated $7 billion annually, bringing along with it a gang culture in which a Vancouver police officer observed handguns as ubiquitous as cell phones. And drugs are not the only criminal activity across our border. Perhaps even more shocking is Canada's role in the global human trafficking trade. Human trafficking is now the second largest organized crime worldwide, possibly tied to arms trafficking. It is estimated to be a $32 billion annual black market industry, which earns more than Google, Nike, and Starbucks combined. Today there are estimated to be approximately 27 million people worldwide who are considered to be enslaved. 80% of those are women and 50% are children. And according to the U.S. Department of State's 2008 Trafficking in Persons report, Canada has been identified as a source transit, and destination country for human trafficking. The RCMP estimates that 600 to 800 persons are trafficked into Canada annually, predominantly for sexual purposes. An additional 1,500 to 2,200 people are trafficked through Canada into the United States. Trafficking victims are predominantly from Eastern Europe, Asia, and Africa, according to both the US and UN reports. Trafficking comes in all forms, including forced workers through debt bondage, to work for extremely low wages in poor living conditions, as well as individuals forced to work in the sex trade. While there is no reliable data on the number of persons trafficked within Canada, it is believed that Aboriginal women are disproportionately affected for the purposes of sexual exploitation. This is an area not well understood nor recognized as a problem, probably because it is too shocking to think about, and we would probably not even recognize it when we see it. While it is not an area historically monitored by financial institutions, it is increasingly becoming an area of focus for us. According to the Canadian Criminal Intelligence Service's 2008 Strategic Intelligence Brief on organized crime and domestic trafficking in persons in Canada, girls as young as 12 are trafficked in Canada for sexual purposes. Globally, the age ranges from 4 upwards. Child trafficking and exploitation rings spanning from Mexico through the US and into Canada have also been identified. And the profits from the sale of these children have also been found here in Canada. So why is a banker here to speak to you on this topic rather than law enforcement or CSIS? Since the vast majority of criminals would not be in business of crime if it not were for the tremendous profits to be made, it should not be surprising that there is a direct relationship between the profitability of the crime and its prevalence. A major objective of the battle against crime in Canada and internationally is, therefore, to break the cycle of laundering and reinvestment and to deprive the criminals of the profits from their illicit activities. For over a decade, financial institutions have been tasked with a very significant responsibility and accountability in combating money laundering and terrorist financing under Canadian legislation. The bill to create the original Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act received royal assent on June 29, 2000. The Act has since been amended several times, with possibly the most significant changes having occurred with the enactment of the Anti-Terrorism Act, which created the expanded Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act on December 24, 2001. Under this legislation, financial services providers such as banks, due to their susceptibility to being used for money laundering and terrorist financing, are required to implement a variety of client identification, record-keeping, monitoring, and reporting requirements. It is also important to note that Canada had to implement these legislative and regulatory changes in response to the Financial Action Task Force, to which Canada is a founding member. The Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, is created in 1989 as an intergovernmental body whose purpose is the development and promotion of policies, both at national and international levels, to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. The task force is therefore a policy-making body which works to generate the necessary political will to bring about national legislative and regulatory reforms in these areas. FATF also monitors members' progress in implementing the necessary measures, reviews money laundering and terrorist financing techniques and countermeasures, and promotes the adoption and implementation of appropriate measures globally. In performing these activities, FATF collaborates with other international bodies involved in the combating of money laundering and terrorist financing. In order to participate in the international financial community, Canada and its institutions have had to implement a robust anti-money laundering regime. It is also important to mention FINTRAC, or the Financial Transaction and Report Analysis Centre of Canada, as they are a key player against the fight in Canada. FINTRAC is Canada's financial intelligence unit, which was created in 2000. It is an independent agency reporting to the Minister of Finance, who is accountable to Parliament for the activities of the Centre. It was established and operates within the ambit of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act and its regulations. FINTRAC's mandate is to facilitate the detection, prevention, and deterrence of money laundering and terrorist activity and other threats to the security of Canada. The Centre fulfills its mandate through the following activities: gathering and analyzing information on suspect financial activities, ensuring those subject to the Act comply with reporting, record keeping, and other obligations, making case disclosures of financial intelligence to the appropriate agencies, and enhancing public awareness and understanding of matters related to money laundering and terrorist financing. In 2007-8, FINTRAC disclosed 2,000 cases to various agencies, of which 110 were related to money laundering cases, 29 to terrorist financing cases, and 10 had aspects of both. In 2009 and 10, this number jumped to 579 such disclosures. Getting back to the banking industry, in 2000-2001, the major banks put together small teams of compliance professionals, typically lawyers and accountants, to review the laws and begin to build the necessary programs, systems, and control frameworks to meet the requirements of the regulation. The bar continues to be raised. Regulatory expectations have heightened, and every year our anti-money laundering programs are enhanced and refined. Over the past decade, our knowledge and understanding has improved, and as regulatory expectations continue to rise, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent across the Canadian financial industry to change account opening procedures and systems to capture the required client and transaction information, train our employees to identify activity and behavior that is potentially indicative of money laundering, invest in complex technologies to scan account holders on a daily basis and wire payments in real time against control lists to identify known terrorists and others subject to government sanctions, build systems and algorithms capable of identifying large cash and wire transactions for reporting to regulators, assess our operations here and abroad to identify potential money laundering risks, establish policies, procedures, guidelines, and risk mitigation strategies to address these risks, develop sophisticated transaction monitoring techniques that can identify unusual activity from more than 200 million transactions we, as a single bank, process on a monthly basis here in Canada alone. Now, 10 years later, those small teams of lawyers and accountants have grown significantly to include a much more diverse range of skills than one would expect from a bank compliance group. Our expanded teams now number in the hundreds across the industry and are sourced from all over the world. They include experienced individuals from a variety of law enforcement, intelligence agencies, computer programmers, governance practitioners, and experienced bankers who understand the nuances of hundreds of products and services offered throughout our organization. We work with linguists to calibrate our name matching systems, with auditors to build our independent testing programs, and with corporate security to investigate potentially serious criminal activity. Our programs cover all financial services, from capital markets to life insurance, from credit cards to global correspondent banking. And we are obligated to stay on top of emerging trends and techniques in money laundering and terrorist financing as they continue to evolve and potentially impact each of our businesses. Our data intelligence analysts spend days working through literally millions of bank machine, credit card, wire payment transactions to find more and more complex laundering and terrorist financing patterns and trends that we report to regulators and law enforcement through established processes. Increasingly sophisticated analysis of financial transactions can reveal some startling but detailed pictures as the crimes unfold, which, when shared with the relevant authorities, is working to support more and more apprehensions of criminals and potential terrorists. In summary, the Canadian banking industry takes its anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist obligations very seriously, and we are committed to discharging our obligation in a responsible and effective manner as corporate citizens. Terrorist financing and money laundering remains and will continue to be significant threats to our economy and our safety, so the financial sector will continue to enhance its abilities to deter criminals and terrorists from using our products and services. We will continue to detect and report any activities that raise suspicion, and will continue to partner with our regulators and law enforcement agencies to unravel the complicated webs created by money launderers and terrorist finances. This completes my remarks on the subject, and I would welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, question number one. In the light of recent events regarding the death of Osama bin Laden, has there been increased vigilance in the counter-terrorist front? The way I answer that is yes, probably. There is an expectation that there may be attacks, but the enhanced vigilance will probably be on the part of government agencies, port authorities, airports. From a financial institution's perspective, I think it's business as usual. Nothing has really changed from our perspective, because one of the comments I made is organizations like Al-Qaeda are no longer an organization, they're an ideology. So the belief systems are still out there. Those individuals will continue to commit acts of terror, but certainly I suspect there's enhanced vigilance at various government authorities and agencies and buildings. In their analysis released today, FinTrack reported that substantially all the suspicious transaction reports it receives relate to cash, ostensibly low-hanging money laundering fruit. How can financial institutions begin to find the more sophisticated schemes, those which involve electronic transactions, and particularly those conducted through alternative financial ecosystems?
Good question. Somebody knows what they're talking about. One, I think it's important to remember that 80% of the activities will come from cash and wire transfers. My comments that these individuals have hundreds of millions of dollars. The picture you saw was from a Mexican cartel who had $200 million. So I think first we've got to get that right. We've got to get the basics right. In terms of how to find the more sophisticated patterns, this is where increasingly we as an organization, the industry is investing in data mining and analytics, is to find the more complex patterns. And I don't have time to go over what that involves, but certainly it is focused on areas where typically an individual in our branches could not find, or our regular transaction monitoring systems could not find. This is where we're focusing our data miners and analysts to really look for those more complex patterns. And I think over the next few years, you'll begin to see the fruits of that work.
Where does Canada stand on its anti-money laundering policies?
Oh, big question. The Financial Action Task Force, which I mentioned, found a number of gaps in Canada's anti-money laundering program back, in 2000, 2001. And we enacted legislation and regulation in response to that. Subsequent to that, a number of gaps were identified by FATF in a subsequent review. We have addressed those gaps. I'm sure we have some work to do, but for the most part, I think we've found either partially compliant or fully compliant. There are some areas for improvement, absolutely.
Sorry, I just got handed how much. How do you safeguard against innocent businesses being wrongfully accused of being a high-risk business and the banks closing their accounts, saying they are not in the bank's comfort zone and that there is no discussion to satisfy this accusation?
A couple of comments on that. One, before we make that decision, that's not a decision we make lightly. An enormous amount of work goes into arriving at that decision. An enormous amount of analysis goes into that decision. Secondly, our business lines have an escalation and an appeals process internally, and it goes to very senior levels. If an appeal is made internally, it does go to very senior levels. There are certain areas where institutions are feeling it's from a risk perspective, it's not worthwhile. The challenge I think financial institutions have is at the end of the day, you're left holding the bag. And I think that's the bottom line, is you can take any risk decision you want, but you need the control infrastructure to support that particular business line. And not all financial institutions are equipped to build those control infrastructures, and they have taken the decision that they perhaps don't want to deal with a certain business segment.
Last question. Does the RBC team feel AML and fraud can be better addressed by cooperating with other banks? And if so, how is this best done?
We certainly, the institutions talk at the Canadian Bankers Association. We exchange ideas, typologies. We don't share client information. That's certainly not permitted. And my personal view is that's certainly one area where I think we as a country need to do a little more on to facilitate easier exchange of information while respecting the privacy of our clients. So we're not talking wholesale sharing, but if there are significant threats from a fraud or a money laundering perspective.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you very much.
I'd like to call on Annette Jewell to formally thank our speaker today.
Thank you. On behalf of the Board of Directors, it's my pleasure to thank you for being here today at the Empire Club of Canada.
Karim, as our token of our appreciation from everybody here and from the club, I'd like to present you with a book entitled Who Said That? Memorable Notes, Quotes, and Anecdotes, selected from the Empire Club of Canada's speeches, 1903 to 2003. Finally, a couple of housekeeping items. We have some upcoming events. This Thursday, May 12th, Peter Gilgan, founder and chief executive officer of Mattamy Homes, will be down the hall in the concert hall. There are tickets left. Daniela Bois-Par, executive director, Entertainment Software Association of Canada, in this room on May the 30th. On June 2nd, we have John Laforette, president of Wind Concerns Ontario, and that will be down the hall in the concert hall, and we will let you know of other upcoming events as we get into June. Finally, I would like to thank Dow Jones Risk and Compliance for sponsoring our VIP reception today. Thank you to SAS Canada and Mr. Discount for sponsoring our student tables today. I would like to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor. This meeting is being broadcast live on Rogers Cable and will be replayed on Rogers Cable over the next few days. We are grateful for Rogers for their ongoing support, and we look forward to that continuing. Believe it or not, the Empire Club of Canada is on Twitter and Facebook, and we do have a website, empireclub.org. Thank you all so much for coming. We're really glad to see you. We hope you enjoyed your lunch and enjoyed our presentation. Please come again soon. This meeting is now adjourned.